Well, perhaps as you heard the gospel reading this morning, you were a bit confused. After all, it's only the third week of Advent. It's not Christmas yet. And here we are reading part of the Christmas story from Luke 2. What's going on? Has Pastor Lauren finally given up her insistence on being Team Advent and acquiesced to the culture that tells us Christmas begins the day after Halloween? No, friends, I assure you, I am still Team Advent, and we are still solidly in Advent here at Muhlenberg, and we are still singing Advent songs. But the more time I spend with the song of the angels in Luke 2, the more I hear its underlying beat, its texture and timbre through the lens of Advent. Why is that? Well, I think we need to begin by remembering what Advent is all about. It's easy for us to say that it's about getting ready for Christmas, right? Preparing to celebrate the baby Jesus. And that's true. But when we leave it at that, it's easy for us to then sentimentalize it, to make it be about a generic spirit of Christmas that makes us feel all warm and fuzzy. We can't forget that Advent is about getting ready for Christmas in a very deep and maybe its truest sense, that it's about preparing for the coming of Christ in his fullness. During Advent, we don't just look back and say, yay, Jesus was here at Christmas. We also look forward and say, and we trust that Christ is coming again. As the Episcopal priest and scholar Fleming Rutledge says, Advent is the time for meditating upon the condition of the lost world and the lost people in it. The same world that received its Lord and King 2,000 years ago. It is the time for looking with unblinking eyes at the evil around us. Just as our old friend John the Baptist, the main man of Advent, looks unblinkingly at the crowds of people who come to him and calls them a brood of vipers who had better flee from the wrath to come. The great wisdom of the Advent season immediately preceding Christmas is that we are invited all together to prepare ourselves for the Lord's coming by gathering intentionally as a community to hear the truths about the human condition that are hard to bear. This is our corporate task this Advent season, and our privilege to listen for these truths in the context of our faith. We may not immediately think of the angel's song as being sung in the same key as the words of John the Baptist. It doesn't appear to call out evil or make us face our own sin. But it is, in fact, an incredibly subversive song, challenging the powers that rule our world. Now, the powers that ruled the world in the time of Jesus was the Roman Empire, with, of course, the emperor as its head. It was a system of domination. Rome dominated people's lives. They had ways of controlling people's lives and putting people in their place. They believed they had manifest destiny, that the gods had chosen them to rule the world. And everyone had to pay homage to the emperor. If you went to a meal, you had to pour out a libation to the emperor. And his icon, his image, was everywhere, reminding you of his power. And of course, the emperor, Caesar Augustus, wasn't content with the people he already ruled. He wanted his kingdom to expand. He wanted to rule the whole world. So he commissioned his troops to spread the good news, he called it, of Pax Romana to all the world, the peace of Rome. And the way that worked is the army, in full combat gear, would reach the edge of a foreign nation, and an envoy would enter the capital and bring good news from Caesar. "We bring you glad tidings," they'd say. "We bring you peace. We will protect you. If you come under our authority, if you pledge your allegiance to us, we will guarantee you peace and safety and security." But of course, this was more like a mafia type peace. It's like, when the mafia comes to town, goes to the neighborhood store and says, "Hey, you need to pay us $1,000 a week. And if you do that, you don't have to worry about anything. We'll take care of you. You'll never get robbed." And if you give a polite no thank you to that invitation, you may discover the next night that your store has been bombed. And then they come back the next day and say, "See, you should have paid the insurance." It was that sort of sense that Rome said, "We bring you peace, but you have to come under our authority and do what we tell you to do." That involved, of course, paying taxes. It involved singing songs of praises to Caesar, offering him sacrifices, praying to or for him, eating meals and attending parades in his name. And Rome encouraged hymn singing in particular. They used these songs as propaganda tools. Singing songs was considered part of one's patriotic duty. And we know that when people sing together, songs praising their country, their rulers, they can feel a sense of civic pride. And in the case of the Roman Empire, often as they would sing these songs, they would think, "Oh, we are the most blessed people on earth." But of course, if you or the neighboring country resisted, if you didn't get on board with Rome's agenda, they'd seize your property, burn your houses, enslave your children. Violence was the engine that drove the empire. Violence was how they ensured peace. Now, if you're a shepherd, if you are poor, you're marginalized, you are just trying to get by in the system that's intent on keeping you down, and suddenly an angel appears and says, "I'm bringing you good news of great joy," you're going to realize right from the start, that sounds like Caesar's words. But this isn't about Caesar. This is about a regime change, a new king. This is about a king who's bringing peace on earth, but it's not a false Pax Romana that dominates and oppresses. This is a peace based in shalom, the fullness, the wholeness of the people. A peace based in healing and love and trust. And the song that the angels sing, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favors," well, that becomes a song of the people. Along with these other canticles that we've heard from Zechariah and Mary these past 2 weeks, and next week the song from Simeon, these all become songs that the people came together and sang, both in celebration of what God has done and in future hope of what God will do. They became, in their small house church gatherings or when they were out in the field working, they became these songs of resistance in the midst of an oppressive regime. Good news, the Lord brings peace. That is actually a direct challenge to the powers of domination. And we know as we follow Jesus' life and death that Rome continued to try and do its worst. And still, the people sang the songs that reminded them that freedom was on the horizon, even if it was not yet fully achieved. These songs kept the story of Christ alive in the community and were a means of peaceful non-compliance with the demands of the empire. Songs still do that, We see it in so many forms of nonviolent resistance. There's so many examples, I think most of all probably, of "we shall overcome," which encouraged those struggling for civil rights in the 1960s. "We shall overcome," they sang. "We'll walk hand in hand. We shall all be free. We are not afraid. We are not alone. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday." The song represented their cause, their aspirations, their determination to resist nonviolently the system that held sway over human life. And as they sang in unison, the lyrics proclaimed simply but powerfully that one day oppressors would no longer rule. The late Congressman John Lewis, whose faith led him to be active in nonviolent resistance during the civil rights movement, he once said, "If it hadn't been for music, the civil rights movement would have been like a bird without wings." The music brought the people together and brought hope and promise. Now, of course, oppression and violence and sin are not just things that happened in our past, which brings us back to what I said about Advent being the time to tell the truth and hear the truth about the human condition. It's a time for us to consider our own roles in systems of oppression. Even if it's as simple as last night, I was doing some Christmas shopping on Amazon without a thought on my mind as to who were making these items, whether they were paid a fair wage or had safe working conditions. And given how inexpensive some of those purchases were, my guess is that they were probably not paid a fair wage or necessarily had safe working conditions. And so right there, that's me, participating in a system of oppression from which I benefit. It's true, the empire might look a little different than it did in Caesar's time. We live in a country with a lot of freedoms, but we all know that domination and power and force are all still alive and well. Now, the more we reflect on this, the more examples we may think of, the more we might move from feeling convicted in our sin to feeling despair. It all feels so big. There are so many ways in which our world does not reflect God's kingdom of peace and love. There are so many ways in which even the church, and maybe especially sometimes the church, colludes with the empire and loses its way. There are ways in which we try to work for justice and peace, and still we can't quite get it right. What hope, then, do we have? 30 years ago, there was a terrible genocide in Rwanda. Over the course of about 3 months, nearly 1 million ethnic Tutsi and moderate Hutu were killed as the international community and UN peacekeepers stood by. What hope do we have in a world like that? Later that year, an article that was written in Vanity Fair, of all places, shared this story. A French priest in Rwanda who had survived the massacres of the spring of 1994 was asked whether his experiences had shaken his faith in God. "Absolutely not," he replied. "But," he added matter-of-factly, "what happened in this country has destroyed my faith in humankind forever." In Rwanda these days, the author continues, even an atheist has a hard time pushing away the thought that God is a better bet than man. And that is really where these Advent songs of resistance lead us. To the God who is a better bet than humanity. To a God who isn't just a bet. A God who is breaking into our darkest nights as we watch and wait, with the good news that it's not up to us to fix this broken world. To a God who has promised to be with us in this in-between time, between the birth of Jesus at that first Christmas and the day when Christ will come in fullness. To a God who invites us to walk with Jesus, resisting the empire and the forces of evil, and living into his kingdom of peace and love. To a God who will come in glory to make all things right. And to a God who gathers us together to sing countercultural Advent songs of resistance and promise and hope. Amen.